ring in Toronto, says Sam Cooper. Yeah, it's a Chinese fentanyl money laundering ring operating in Toronto. Nobody seems to care about that. The United Kingdom arrests an 11-year-old for being involved in the protests against the invasion of Britain. And the Supreme Court of Canada refuses to hear the travel mandate challenge by Brian Peckford and Maxime Bernier. And that's where we've got to start. There's all sorts of crazy stuff happening. Lots going on. Let's get to it. First, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom says today the Supreme Court of Canada effectively told Canadians that the challenge to the COVID vaccine travel mandates was not of sufficient public importance to be heard. Lawyer Allison P. shares her thoughts. I'll double check that this is one speed. Yeah, okay, we're good. And this is a little bit long, but it's worth listening to the whole thing. So usually I talk a little bit more at the beginning of the show, but honestly, this is worth listening to. Here we go.
My name is Alison Pavich, and I'm legal counsel to the former Premier of Newfoundland, Brian Peckford, and the leader of the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier. These gentlemen raised a constitutional legal challenge against the federal government's COVID-19 vaccine travel mandate for aircraft in 2022, along with other Canadians. They argued that their charter rights of mobility, religion and conscience, privacy, life, liberty, and security of the person, and equality have been infringed. The case was never heard on its merits because the federal court justice found that it was moot, and she exercised her discretion not to hear it anyway. This was despite the fact that the federal government had threatened to bring the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for travel back if circumstances arose. We appealed the case to the Federal Court of Appeal, and the appeal was dismissed as the Federal Court of Appeal did not find any errors made by the lower court judge. We asked the Supreme Court of Canada, through written application, to hear our appeals, specifically to look at the test for mootness and see that it's flawed and needs to be rewritten to include the circumstances of emergencies, where in a public health emergency, as we've seen, governments across the country these last 4 years would implement orders that many say were draconian, and then before cases could be heard, those orders were lifted, leaving Canadians with a big unknown as to whether their governments had acted lawfully. That kind of situation is an affront to the rule of law, as governments are not held to account time and time again for harsh infringements of Canadians' charter rights and freedoms. The Supreme Court of Canada today announced that they were dismissing the applicants' leave applications, which means that our appeals will not be heard by the Supreme Court of Canada. It's a truly sad day for Canadians, and especially Premier Peckford, who had a hand in writing the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. He wrote the charter, went before the court system and said, my charter rights have been infringed, and the courts did not want to hear his case. They found that his case did not rise to the level of public importance to be heard. Again, this is an affront to the rule of law. It leaves governments unaccountable to Canadians, and it leaves Canadians wondering whether they live in a country where it's lawful for their federal government to be able to prohibit them from leaving the country based on their personal medical decision. That is historic. We've never seen this occur in history in Canada. And it's a question which continues to be unanswered.
Historic. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And she says it leaves the government unaccountable to Canadians. And I think that is very accurate and inexcusable. Sean says, completely ridiculous. He's responding to this news. Canadians need to realize how serious this is. It says breaking news, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. This is in writing, but it says the Supreme Court of Canada has declined to hear the challenges to COVID vaccine travel mandates. These challenges were advanced by the Honourable Brian Peckford, last living signer of the Canadian Charter Rights and Freedoms, and the Honourable Maxime Bernier, leader of the Federal People's Party of Canada. Can governments evade judicial scrutiny of mandates made with extraordinary emergency powers? They wanted Canada's highest court to answer that question, and it will not be answered because, well, the court says that's not that important. Forget about it, guys. Forget about it. What are you guys talking about here? However, the court has already shown that they are partisan, that they've already taken a stance on this, and it's not aligned with Maxime Bernier and Brian Peckford. Lion Advocacy points this out. He says, given what was, in my respectful view, an imprudent media interview by the Chief Justice in 2021 related to the Supreme Court of Canada's COVID-19 status and policies, I assume the Chief Justice recused himself from today's refusal to hear the Peckford-Bernier COVID-19 airline train travel mandate case. And I don't think that he has recused himself, but Lion Advocacy is making an excellent point. And here's the article from 2021 that he's referring to. Supreme Court mandates COVID-19 jabs for in-court staff. Federal CA won't disclose COVID policies. Canada's top court has informed the Lawyers Daily that all 9 of its judges are fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and that its staffers will have to be fully vaccinated in order to work in the Supreme Court of Canada's courtroom during the fall session, which begins next month. Responding to queries from the Lawyers Daily, the Supreme Court of Canada said in an emailed statement that Chief Justice of Canada Richard Wagner has directed that access to the top court's Ottawa hearing room by court staff, including law clerks, registry clerks, and court attendants, will be conditional upon being fully vaccinated, and this direction will be in effect for the fall session, which begins in early October. Remember, this is 21. Until further notice, counsel will continue to appear remotely via Zoom, and the court building remains closed to the public, explained the Supreme Court's exclusive legal officer, Renee Thoreau, who noted that the court is continuing to monitor the situation with a view to ensuring a safe and healthy workplace for all our employees within the federal public service framework. So you can't guarantee that, and you can't police it, and you can't create a situation where justice is not going to be served. And yet the Supreme Court of Canada is. I think that the only way to fix this is to have public tribunals. Like, we're going to do this with a tribunal of public people who are not corrupt, because it seems like you judges and this whole system, corrupt. The police, corrupt. The municipal government, corrupt. The United Nations, corrupt. The provincial government, corrupt. Federal government, corrupt. I'm sorry. I wish that it weren't true, but it seems that it is true. So we should respond as if reality exists. And it seems, because these people are, right? Like, these people are using this fake nonsense of COVID-19, because where did the flu go, right? And this nonsense of safety, for your safety, comrade. We're going to destroy your life and ruin your job and or inject this stuff into you and not hear your court case and make sure your country waters down whatever the rule of law means to mean absolutely nothing, right? And that's what these people have done. They've not saved anything. They've not guarded the rules and laws and traditions of this country. They've done everything they can to destroy them. And so a tribunal of citizens, I think, would probably do better than any of our systems that have been corrupted, period. And so that's I think, the way forward. But I mean, we'll see, right? Where do you find these impartial citizens? Because there's a lot of Karens out there. Police on guard for these, says Glorraine Blaise. Now, I've talked about her before, but here's an update. And she's moved to France. And after reading this, I was like, great, but France? Oh, if it only were not France, like somewhere else. Anyway, France. Glorraine Blaise is a former lawyer and a resident of Quebec. Prior to COVID-19, she had a successful career in civil liability and medical malpractice litigation. The COVID era brought a plethora of cases to her door, while also pushing the practice of gaslighting anyone who spoke against the narrative, including Glorraine. After recognizing the lies and manipulation of our government's political and medical leaders, Glorraine began to speak out. The price for having a voice was her license to practice law. She was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation and was disbarred when she refused. The obvious narrative being that if you disagree with the government's position, you must must be out of your mind. Nothing could be further from the truth. Glorraine dug in and continued her efforts to have the evidence acknowledged, pushing forward with a class action lawsuit that names 35 political and medical leaders for their role in pushing the safe and effective narrative known to be blatantly false, as confirmed by the release of the Pfizer documents. Even attempts to intimidate her didn't deter Blaise. The threats prompted her to relocate to France, seeking asylum while continuing her important work. In an interesting twist, France will now hear the evidence that our Canadian government has fought to keep quiet. Blaise explains that she is suing these politicians and ministers directly to ensure that Canadian taxpayers are not financially burdened, forcing the defendants to pay out of their own pockets and bear the burden of their lies without the ability to pass it along to Canadians. Once each of the defendants are served, a hearing will determine whether the case can move forward registered as a class action lawsuit. This is truly an important case demanding transparency and accountability from the precise individuals directly responsible for the misinformation that caused such harm and division. We look forward to seeing the evidence come forward from France through the application for asylum. Please support this effort. You will find donation links as well as complete details of the case in the attached release. So there you go. You can check that out if you're interested. So weird that France is interested in hearing this. It seems like, Macron and Trudeau are buddies, right? Maybe they're going to see this evidence, bury it, and then bury her, right? And I mean that proverbially. So I hope that she knows what she's doing, right? It's probably that she's doing her best and trying to get this information out there. But man, like there's a machine that seems to be everywhere, and yowza, right? Scary stuff. And do I think that what she's saying is true? Probably, right? Like it seems very plausible within the context of what we've lived through in the last few years. But the powers that be, are not above threatening her in Canada, are not above taking away her license to practice law and worse. And so with all of that being true, man, I wish I were more confident that the good guys were going to come out of this one winning, right? Like it'll always be framed that the good guys won, but like when the good guy is Keir Starmer, right? When the good guy is Joe Biden, when the good guy is cackling Comrade Kamala, right? Like it's not great when the good guy is Justin Trudeau. Right? It's not good. So True North is reporting nonprofit civil liberties group in Canada is threatening legal action against the Whitehorse Yukon City Council over a controversial bylaw, which the group says violates the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So there's the details are in a close vote. They have more rules around what you can say, the signs you can bring to city council meetings, et cetera, et cetera. And the group says it's violating the charter rights, basically. And I don't think they're wrong. I don't think that we need to examine the whole article for understanding that, but I don't think they're wrong. Randy Hillier says the comments from the judge this week in the case of the Coutts 4 amount to contempt for the administration of justice and the jury. I'm concerned, and maybe I'm incorrect, but I'm concerned that they're just like using all of this stuff, the political opinions of the judge, et cetera, as a washing machine to pretend that there's a reason to keep these people behind bars. And there really isn't. There isn't at all. Like they were found guilty of the major charges by a jury of their peers, and they keep kicking the sentencing date like a week. And so like the not guilty verdict for the big charges came in on August 3rd, and we're August 30th. And now they have to wait until September 9th. So another month in jail for sentencing. Like what? How is this? Where is the, usually there's a standard for once X happens, then you have a certain amount of days to get Y done. Right. So I didn't realize they had an entire month to, piss around on sentencing on some minor infractions after 3 years in jail, right? Like in remand custody. Holy smokeronies. Anyway, Randy Hillier. And the other part of this is, it seems like if you go and ask a judge, what do you think about this? And the judge says it's bullshit, they should be in jail or whatever it is. Then that judge, all of a sudden, that's news. So I don't know if it's the judge in the actual case who's making these statements or if it's just a random judge they found. I didn't read the article, so I apologize. I just saw Randy Hillier talking about it. I read earlier in the week where the judge was saying, these guys were gunning for the RCMP, but the jury didn't think so. And so I don't know how the judge can say that. Like if the judge in the trial is saying that, isn't that a mistrial? Isn't there like some kind of legal procedural something or other that would Like, doesn't he have to sentence these guys still? And he's saying that like that? That seems odd to me, to say the least. Anyway, Danielle Smith, so continues Randy Hillier. What's your game, Danielle Smith? And her AG ought to lodge a complaint with the Judicial Council and the Federal Justice Minister demanding his removal from the bench. Every Alberta resident ought to lay a complaint with the Law Society of Alberta against the Crown Prosecutor for the abject disregard for his solicitor's oath. In addition, Danielle Smith can remove the Crown Attorney for failure to abide by the Prosecution Service of Canada regulations. There are things that they could do. I feel like there are things that they could do. And if there weren't, you're the premier of the province, I'd have a meeting and say, give me 10 things I can do by the end of the day to move this thing forward. Now, like, you've got 20 minutes. I want options on my on my desk by the end of this meeting. Actionable options. Like, we're sending emails within the hour. Period. I want meetings this afternoon, right? Like, we're not talking about let's get this done by Thanksgiving. Today, right? Get these people in my office. I want to yell at them, and then I want to throw a stapler at the wall, kind of close to them, but not, like they're gonna get hit, just to intimidate them, right? I wouldn't actually throw a stapler, but I'd think about it. Who has staplers these days? Nobody has paper. Okay, Dane Lloyd is highlighting this. Trudeau claimed that the Emergencies Act was proportional, measured, and responsible. This is false. Hold on, this is not sorted correctly. We'll get to that when we talk about the Freedom Convoy, which is coming up after this series of tabs. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, let's talk about the temporary foreign workers, because this is a big deal. Everybody and their dog is talking about temporary foreign workers in Canada, and Justin Trudeau is highlighting it as a success story. Look at all this success that we've got. They came to Canada and pulled up their bootstraps and built this business, except that's not the whole story. That's what the story that Justin Trudeau would like you to believe, but it's not the whole story. Here's what Justin Trudeau said. Justin says, Tariq's story represents the best of Canada. He came to Nova Scotia in 2015 as a Syrian refugee. He hoped to rebuild his family's chocolate business here. And yesterday I visited him and his wife, Mila, at their Peace by Chocolate store on the Halifax waterfront, one of their 2 locations. So, success, right? Except that there's more to this story. Anne says, about that successful chocolate shop, Liberals were giving grants to the owner before he was a Canadian citizen. Isn't that weird? The Buckywell says, funny how if you donate enough money to Trudeau, you're lucky enough to get $275,000 in free grants. So Peace by Chocolate gets $275,000, $75,000 in 2019 and $200,000 in 2023, right? Wild. That's lots of money, right? And sharing this again, here is Peace by Chocolate's website. It says, Peace by Chocolate will hire 50 refugees at its facilities across Canada. In addition, we will provide mentorship and guidance to 10 refugee startups to develop their business. We will also provide help for refugee businesses to access new markets through our distribution and retailing networks. As a company founded by refugees, we are committed for the following. 1, recruitment. We will actively recruit and consider qualified refugees for open positions within our company, and will provide training and support to help them succeed in their roles. So they're not hiring Canadians. They're here using Canadian tax dollars in their business, grants and all sorts of money, right? And they're not hiring Canadians, right? They're hiring refugees, right? And maybe the government likes to subsidize that, but we should really end that subsidy and prioritize hiring Canadians first, right? First, hiring Canadians, stop. Full stop. Rupa is talking about all this, and Mark Miller, who's the immigration minister, says, no more work permits for visitors who apply within Canada. So Rupa says, hold on. Basically, someone could show up as a visitor on a visitor's visa and say, I'm going to stick around and look for a job. What kind of stupid policy is this? Apparently, this was a pandemic-era policy that is now being canceled. The thing is, it didn't make sense even during the pandemic. Canada, under Justin Trudeau, is governed by a bunch of clowns, and it's making the country look like a complete joke. Over time, the value of Canadian passports will degrade, given all the losers Trudeau's let in. Now, hold on. It's not a pandemic-era policy. It wasn't, because it was accessed. Do you know who? By the terrorist family who got in and was plotting that terrorist attack just recently. Right? So that's pretty dastardly. How do I know that? This is the back and forth between Michael, one of the Michaels, and this guy who's talking about the program that was utilized by the terrorist. He was in Canada and he started just staying here. That was it. And after being denied in 2015, they were just talking about being denied in 2015. And in 2018, he wasn't flagged as somebody who is an ISIS terrorist who dismembered people on video. Here we go.
Satisfied with what is provided. So there are multiple reasons for that.
Do we know if he was rejected based on security reasons?
To my knowledge, that was not the case, because when he applied again on 2018 as a visitor visa, he was approved.
Okay. So, sir, are you able to confirm that to this committee in writing, that this rejection wasn't for a security reason?
Sorry, it was Caputo, not one of the Michaels. I thought it was Michael Cooper or Michael, the other one, but it was not. Here's Francois Legault. So one of the terrorist guys got in under a visitor visa in 2018, and he wasn't flagged under any kind of security, anything. Like, there was no flag for him. So they were utilizing these programs well before the pandemic, and we were being flooded well before then. But it was verboten. You couldn't say we can't do that. We can't let in people unvetted here, right? But they were. And if you said that, people would say, "Oh, you're so racist," right? Maxime Bernier said, basically, we should vet these people like we used to, and he was tarred and feathered as a racist, right? Here's Ryan Garrettson. He says, Legault is once again upset at the mass immigration and asylum seekers pouring into Quebec, and I bet Legault happily accepted the $750 million from Trudeau a couple of months ago to help deal with it. And yeah, I feel like, and Ponzi scheme is kind of going to come up as a theme a couple of times in the rest of the show later too. But I feel like we may be in a situation that you can have all the promises you want, and then when you get into office, and like you have to trust people, the bureaucrats, etc. But I think that you have all the promises you want. You get into office, and then they come to you and say, "Listen, if you turn off the 1 million people we're bringing in a year, this is what it's going to do to your economy. Do you want to turn it off?" And like in that moment, that person loses their nerve, and they say, "What is it going to do to the economy?" And they go, "Oh, people aren't going to like that. Think of the chocolate cereal." And then they stop listening to the people who say, "Yes, we do want that." And because like when you do that, then you have to figure out the economic reality. Then you have to figure out the solution to the problem. And like I talk about turning off the temporary foreign worker program while using another program like the temporary foreign worker program, but for Canadians, to fill in the gaps, because you can't turn a program off like that. It's not going to work. It's going to cause problems. So like, instead of saying, I understand that we can't turn off this tap yet, but here's the plan for how we're going to stop the flow, support the businesses, and increase the Canadian employment, and turn off these temporary foreign workers while making sure these businesses remain viable. See what I'm saying? And like, you can do that. And I think that our politicians are so watered down, their capabilities are so watered down, that like they can go to a barbecue and speak about things. But as far as like implementing a plan like what I'm talking about, it just doesn't seem like they're doing it. It seems like what they're doing is, we're going to lock everybody down, and then we're going to steal all your money and give it to downtown businesses so we can put bike lanes in, or something like that. Not that I don't get it. I get it. But I feel like, again, they're being bamboozled, and then the bureaucracy is taking their bamboozled brains and building bike lanes, or building whatever the UN 2030 plan agenda calls for. More people, more people, more people. And that's it. And that's what they do. And we get saddled with, if you call them out on social media and say, we don't want this, you're a traitor because we don't want this, people say, you're bullying a politician. How dare you do that? And it's like, well, the politician is actively ignoring the promises they made and their constituents. So bullying is, I wouldn't even say that's bullying. If you're in the public eye, if you're doing a public job, you should expect feedback, good and bad. And if you can't do that, then get out of the job, honestly. I'm not going to listen to Legault because I've already talked too much. Moving on. Holly Doan says, employers should not rely on migrant labor as a business model, says Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. Can somebody tell the chocolate people that? Like, honestly, they're relying on on refugees, right? For their business model. That's their whole thing. But Chrystia Freeland says they shouldn't do that. Feds are restoring a 2014 regulation introduced by then Minister Jason Kenney, limiting foreign workers to 10% of payroll. Oof. The Peace by Chocolate is going to have their payroll decimated, right? Yowza, what's going to happen? They're going to have to hire Canadians. Whew. Maxime Bernier says 6 years ago, the current Liberal immigration minister, Mark Miller, blasted me and said it wasn't true that his government was planning to increase immigration, permanent residents only, from 250 to 350,000 per year. This was fear tactics based on falsehoods. Indeed, I was wrong. It was much worse. They doubled it to 500,000 instead. Now he has to clean up the disaster and is promising to reduce immigration numbers. Can we trust him to do it? Can we trust Poilievre's fake conservatives? All they've done for years is play politics with this issue to buy immigrant votes instead of working in the best interests of Canada. Yep. Can we trust them? I don't think so. But Poilievre is trying to kind of say the right things. There's a couple of times he stops here. He says, the Liberals and the Conservatives have agreed for 30 years. We put the same policy forward for 30 years. And he kind of stops and looks around like, shit, should I say that? And you can see the calculation. Like, it's so interesting. I'll point it out when I see it because I feel like it's really obvious. Okay. Here's a minute of Pierre Poilievre. And it might be too loud. Hold on. I'll turn it down a little bit. Here we go.
You want to see a reduction in the number of permanent residents that are admitted to Canada in the next 2 years. It's at 500,000 right now.
We have to have fewer, we have to have a smaller population growth. There's no question about it. We cannot grow the population at 3 times the rate of the housing stock as Trudeau has been doing. We need to have a growth rate that is below the growth in housing, healthcare, and employment. If you want to look at, if you want an idea of how I would run the immigration system overall, it's the way it was run for the 30 years prior to Trudeau being Prime Minister. We had a common sense consensus between Liberal.
You see it? We had a common sense consensus between, oh shit. Do I say that we worked together with the Liberals for 30 years? Do I say that we together created the immigration system that was then exploited by Justin Trudeau? My gosh, it was a consensus that we worked together with the Liberals for 30 years. Could I say that? And then he's like, yeah, okay.
And Conservatives for 3 decades that screened people to make sure they were safe, only brought in the numbers that we could absorb into our housing, healthcare, and job market, and blocked temporary foreign workers where they were taking jobs from Canadians. That was
the Conservatives did do the temporary foreign workers, and Justin Trudeau took aim at that and said the temporary foreign workers devalues Canada's workforce. It brings in cheap temporary labor, and we shouldn't do that to people. We shouldn't exploit them like that. And he's saying, that was wonderful. That was a wonderful program. I think the 1987 multiculturalism nonsense that we signed is not helpful for Canada. I think that we should look at that again. I don't necessarily, because that's what Poilievre is talking about returning to. Okay, that's the gold standard that he wants to return to. And it may have seemed like it was working in the early 90s because there wasn't the time to have people to flood in, right? It may have seemed like it was working in the early 2005s. But I think that what's happening now is not just as a result of the last couple of years and the last 3 million people we've brought in, but actually as a cumulative effect of this policy. And I think this policy is wrongheaded. And Poilievre, and like we snookered ourselves with this policy. And so I'll go back to saying what I said before. You have to intelligently turn it off, reroute the water, right? You can't just turn off the water. You have to reroute the water to continue the flow of the economy and all the rest of it, right? And so, but fundamentally, we should reroute the water to prioritize homegrown Canadians, to prioritize people having kids, to prioritize cheap energy, cheap products, cheap buildings so we can export our wonderful products to the rest of the world, and then we don't have to pay as much taxes. Like, these things seem like basic stuff, and yet our politicians are making it seem very complex and almost, confusing. Oh, protect our borders, vet people? We don't know how to do that. And I mean, even Poilievre talking about vetting people, etc., and all the rest of it. Fine, sure. Did it work? I guess, to a degree, but people were not happy about it. They were itchy about it in 2014. That's why Harper got removed, right? One of the reasons. The press made it dead certain that he'd be removed, but still, I digress, right? One of the reasons was people were upset about the use of the temporary foreign worker program, and look what happened, right? It got way worse. And now going back to Harper seems like, oh, that's great. So is this a bit of art of the deal, right? Like you ask for way more than you could possibly imagine that you'll get. You know, I'll take $1 million for that job, please, right? And then they're like, oh, we were offering 125,000. You're like, okay, I'll take 125,000. I was just joking about the million, right? Like, so we don't want this policy. And then they create a policy that is like brutal and unbelievable and jaw-dropping. And then they say, how's this policy? And we're like, okay, that's way better. But still not good. Not good for us, right? So I don't know. Let me know what you think. Am I incorrect about this immigration policy? Should we go back to the Mulrooney era multiculturalism immigration policy of 2015? The heady days of 2015. No. You know, I think that there's a better option. I think that we can strengthen our country in a way that is better than what Poilievre's saying. But unfortunately, I feel like Poilievre's going to be the next prime minister. So looks like we're doing what he says. True North is reporting Chrystia Freeland dismisses Poilievre's concerns about the state of Canada's economy and says conservatives are showing how fundamentally self-centered they are. All they care about is themselves. So the question is about the policy of temporary foreign workers and bringing people in and the number of people coming in and so on and so forth. That's the question. And then Freeland goes on a diatribe about hating conservatives and how they're terrible for Canada. Here's just a little bit of it. We can't listen to too much of it. Her mannerisms and the sniffing, she looks like a Muppet. She looks kind of like Guy Smiley or when I was growing up, I went to England. We used to go to England because that's where my mom's from. And the television shows in England were heavy on puppets, but like human-looking puppets, weird human-looking puppets. And in this freeze frame, she looks like, do you remember the Thunderbirds? I remember the Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds were there was like Team America World Police. The puppets in Team America World Police look like the Thunderbird puppets. And Chrystia Freeland looks like a Thunderbird puppet here. And that's not supposed to be a compliment. Can you hear you?
Poilievre says he will tie population growth to housing, healthcare, and jobs, suggesting there should be a big cut to immigration. What do you say to that?
I'm going to say a couple things. First of all, I do think it is really important for us as Canadians to recognize what a fundamental strength it is for us as a country that we welcome new Canadians. And we are good at welcoming new Canadians, and that is such a strength for us. It's a social strength, it's an economic strength. It's also the case, as our government has recognized, that there have been ways in which the system has been abused. There have been ways in which some of the modifications put in place to deal with the extraordinary circumstances around COVID are not appropriate today. And that's why our government has introduced a cap on the number of temporary residents. That's why our government has introduced a cap on international students. And that's why on Monday, the Prime Minister announced changes, restrictions to the temporary foreign worker program. Because frankly, you know, if you're in a city where unemployment is more than 6%, we want you to go out and hire Canadians.
So why did they change it in the first place? She attacks the conservatives at the end there. It's terrible. But again, not even beyond the scope of the podcast. I just can't stand listening to her. It's a whole minute. And it doesn't make any real sense. The attack doesn't really make any sense. We'll listen to a bit of it.
And every single person who has the privilege of being elected to Parliament and to represent Canadians should be celebrating that good news and should say, thank goodness we see light at the end of the tunnel after all of the challenges posed by COVID. But the Conservatives, I think, are showing how fundamentally self-centered they are. All they care about is themselves and their party, and they are seeing this good news for Canadians. They're seeing it as bad news for themselves. I think that tells you everything you need to know.
She's a lunatic. She's absolutely bonkers. Here is Arpan, and he says, Justin Trudeau has completely destroyed our immigration system. In this video, I want to take a look at exactly how we got here, where we are today, and the path forward. It's a 14-minute video. It's interesting. The Conservatives are actually talking about immigration now, so this is a change. They haven't been talking about immigration up till now, and now they are talking about immigration, so that's notable for a lot of different reasons. This is a 15-minute video, 14-minute video, so I don't have any clips to show you. Hold on, let's see if I can find one. I'll just show the first minute. It talks about a lot of kind of an overview of the problem. So here we go.
Levels of population growth.
Trudeau's destroyed our entire immigration system.
Continue to pursue our policies of openness.
Okay, I think it's time we have an honest conversation on immigration. I don't want to make this a hyper-partisan issue, but it's important we hold those responsible accountable for their actions. I think it's time in Canada we have an honest discussion on our immigration system, where we look at our past, where we were, where we are today, and the path forward. I want to take this back to 2015 and our system back then. Back then, we had a system that was responsible, that was lawful, that was the envy of the world. Canada was a land of opportunities where you came to this country, you worked hard, you played by the rules, you could achieve that Canadian dream. Fast forward to today. We are seeing an immigration system under Justin Trudeau that is full of corruption, fraud, abuse, and chaos.
Students are graduating from programs that are not particularly valuable in the labor market. Essentially, we're using the International Student Program as a source for cheap, exploitable, expendable, temporary labor.
If you look at the rate of growth in Canada, just last year, we had a growth rate of over 3%. That is the highest since the 1950s. Sean Fraser, the former immigration minister himself, now housing minister, has admitted to be losing 1 million people. If you wonder if this is sustainable, it's not. We are hearing stories of newcomers lining up at our food banks in record numbers.
We were kind of overwhelmed by.
So there's all sorts of problems caused by these bad policies, and I mean the Conservatives are starting to talk about it. So that's. Hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful